It was the kind of day that made me second-guess myself. The shelter was quieter than usual, the only sounds being the soft patter of paws and the occasional cough from the volunteers. I wasn't looking to adopt that day. I hadn't planned on it, not after the loss of my previous cat. But sometimes, the universe decides for you. I first saw her in a small, dimly lit room at the back of the shelter, separated from the rest of the cats. Her fur, a mixture of gray and black, was matted, and her eyes held a weariness that seemed beyond her years. She didn't greet me. She didn't even look up as I approached. She sat in the corner, her body tense, as if expecting something to happen. The other cats, most of them playful and curious, could be heard meowing and scratching their cages. But she was different. She was silent. One of the volunteers, a young woman named Sarah, walked over to me and whispered. She came in last. Week after being rescued from a dog-fighting ring, she's still adjusting, but we're hopeful. She's a little broken. Her words hung in the air as I stared at the cat. Her body was scarred, a few fresh cuts still healing. The worst part was the lack of emotion in her gaze. No anger, no fear, just an empty, almost resigned look. The kind of look that said, I've been through too much. I don't trust anyone anymore, Sarah continued. Her name's Daisy. She hasn't purred since she got here. Not once. I crouched down to her level, unsure of what to expect. Slowly, cautiously, I extended my hand through the bars of her cage. There was no frantic pawing at the gate, no sniffing. She just stared at my hand as if it didn't matter. For a moment, I thought I might leave. I wasn't ready for the heartbreak that came with adopting an animal who had suffered so much, but something about her stillness, something about her silent plea kept me there. You can take her home today, Sarah said softly. We just need someone to be patient with her. She'll need time. I didn't think twice. I signed the papers. There was no turning back. I could tell myself I was only doing this to give her a chance, but deep down, I knew it was more. I needed her just as much as she needed me. The drive home was quiet. She sat in the passenger seat, her eyes never leaving me, never blinking. I had no idea what her life had been like before the shelter, but I knew one thing for sure. It wasn't easy. Daisy wasn't just a cat who had been through trauma. She was a cat who had stopped believing in love. And yet, there I was, driving her to her new home, not knowing that my life would never be the same again. The first few days after bringing Daisy home were harder than I could have imagined. She was a different cat from the one I'd seen at the shelter. At first, I wasn't sure if I'd made the right decision. The silence she carried with her was almost suffocating. She barely moved from her corner of the living room, as if the walls of the house were just another cage to her. She didn't eat much, and when she did, it was in small, measured bites, as though she was unsure whether she was allowed to eat at all. Every evening, I would sit nearby, trying to coax her out of her shell, but she wouldn't budge. No purring, no gentle nudge of her head against my hand, nothing. Just those tired eyes that seemed to watch every movement I made, without any trust behind them. It hurt, in a way. The silence she carried with her made the house feel emptier than it had been before. The absence of the comforting sounds I was used to hearing from my previous cats, the purring, the chirps, even the rustling of paws on the floor left an uncomfortable void. I wanted to reach out to her, to help her feel at home, but I didn't know how. One evening, after a particularly difficult day at work, I found her still curled up in her corner, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. Her body was tense, her tail wrapped tightly around her legs, as if she was preparing for something terrible to happen. I placed my hand on the coffee table, just a few inches away from her. Hey Daisy, I whispered softly, hoping she would at least look up. You're safe now. Nothing's going to hurt you here. But she didn't respond, not with a twitch of her ear or a flick of her tail. She remained perfectly still. I took a deep breath, trying not to let my frustration show. I didn't expect her to suddenly act like the cats in the movies coming to me the moment I walked in the door, rubbing against my legs and purring in delight. No, I knew Daisy was different. She had seen too much pain to trust quickly, if at all. For the next few days, I tried everything I could think of to get her to open up. I'd leave out little treats, hoping she'd come closer to me. I'd sit on the floor for hours, talking softly to her, even though I knew she wasn't really listening. Still, no purring, no signs of affection, just silence. It wasn't until the third day that something unexpected happened. I was sitting on the floor, my back against the wall, when I felt a sudden warm weight on my lap. I froze for a second. I thought it was a trick of my tired mind, but no. Daisy had climbed onto my lap, her paws carefully placed, as if she was testing the waters. She stared at me, her eyes wide and cautious, her body still tense. But she was there, on my lap. For the first time I stayed perfectly still, afraid that any sudden movement would send her running. I wasn't sure how long we sat there in silence, minutes, hours. It didn't matter, but eventually, I felt her relax. Her muscles softened, just a little, and her eyes closed halfway. It was subtle, but I could feel it. She was letting me in, just a little. Then, as if on cue, Daisy did something I had been waiting for. Her small, delicate body trembled for just a second, and I felt the faintest, almost imperceptible vibration under my palm. Her first purr was quiet, hesitant, like she wasn't entirely sure if it was okay to make such a sound, but it was there. A small, fragile sign that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to trust me. I didn't move. I didn't want to scare her away. I kept my hand gently resting on her back, feeling the rise and fall of her chest with each breath she took. The purring grew stronger, more confident. It wasn't the deep rumbling purr I had hoped for, but it was a start. It was the beginning of something. As the days went by, Daisy's behavior started to change. Slowly, gradually. She began to explore the house more, cautiously at first, but with more curiosity than before. She sniffed the corners of rooms, patted softly around the house, and even started coming to me when I called her name. It wasn't much, but it was progress. Every time she came closer, every time she made that small, hesitant leap of faith, I felt a little more hopeful. One morning, I woke up to the soft sound of paws padding down the hallway. I opened my eyes, half expecting Daisy to be curled up in her usual spot. But no, she was sitting at the foot of my bed, watching me with those tired eyes. But now there was something different. There was recognition. There was trust. "Morning, Daisy," I said, my voice groggy from sleep. "You're up early." She didn't respond, but she didn't need to. Her presence in the room, her quiet companionship, was enough. That morning, for the first time, she let me pick her up. She didn't flinch, she didn't pull away. She just let me hold her gently, as if she knew that she was finally safe. And for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one who needed healing. By the end of the week, Daisy had stopped hiding in corners. She began sleeping on the couch, sometimes curling up next to me, her small body a warm presence beside mine. Her purring became louder, more constant, and with each passing day, it felt like we were building a bond of connection that neither of us had known we needed. It wasn't perfect, not by any means. There were still moments of hesitation, moments when she would freeze at sudden sounds or flinch when I moved too quickly. But those moments were fewer, and every day, she became more of the cat I had always wanted her to be. I knew that Daisy's journey was far from over. She had a lot of healing left to do, and so did I. But at that moment, as I sat on the couch with her curled up beside me, I realized something important. We had both found something that we hadn't even known we were, looking for love, real love. And maybe that was enough to heal us both. The first week with Daisy felt like walking on eggshells. Every movement, every word, every gesture was met with hesitation. She was no longer in the shelter, no longer surrounded by the chaos of other animals. She was safe, in a quiet home. But it seemed like the silence had become her shield, and I wasn't sure how to break through it. I tried everything I could think of to make her feel comfortable. I left out her favorite treats, placed them in different spots around the house, hoping she'd sniff them out. I'd sit on the floor with a bowl of food beside me, trying to coax her into eating, but she would only stare at the bowl, her eyes distant, like she didn't trust the food or even her own instincts. Some nights, I would find her curled up under the kitchen table, not asleep, but alert, watching the door like she was waiting for something bad to happen. Her body was always tense, her fur puffed out slightly, as if she was ready to defend herself at any moment. I knew that she had been through things I couldn't even imagine, and I understood why she was like this. But that didn't make it any easier. I remember one particular evening, when I decided to try something different. I'd spent hours working on my laptop, my eyes growing heavy from staring at the screen. I looked up and noticed Daisy sitting on the windowsill, her face pressed against the glass, watching the world outside. It was one of those rare moments when she wasn't hiding, when she wasn't retreating into the shadows of the house. She was just watching. I stood up slowly, not wanting to startle her. I walked over to the window and stood beside her, my hand gently resting on the sill. "You like watching the birds, huh?" I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't expect her to respond. In fact, I didn't expect her to even acknowledge me. But to my surprise, she turned her head slightly, her eyes locking with mine for just a moment. It was the first time in days that I felt any kind of connection with her. She didn't move, didn't react, but she didn't pull away either. She was there, and I was there. And for a split second, it felt like we were sharing something, even if it was just a quiet moment. But as quickly as it came, that connection disappeared. The next day, Daisy was back to her usual routines, sitting in the corner, barely eating, barely moving. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of disappointment. I thought maybe that small moment had meant something, that maybe she was starting to trust me, but it seemed like I had been wrong. I started doing research, looking up everything I could find about traumatized animals, trying to understand her behavior. I found stories from other people who had adopted rescue animals, who had been through similar struggles. Some of them described their pets as broken, and in a way, I started to feel like Daisy was broken too. I knew I was being too hard on her, expecting her to heal overnight, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was failing her. As the days passed, I started noticing little things. A flicker of movement when I entered the room, a soft sniffing when I set the food down in front of her. She wasn't ignoring me entirely, but she wasn't letting me in either. There were times when I would get close enough to her to touch her, and she would freeze, her body rigid with tension. Other times, she would simply walk away, as if she didn't want anything to do with me. And yet, Despite her distance, I could feel her watching me. Always watching, always waiting. For what I didn't know, I began to realize that Daisy wasn't just a cat who had been abandoned. She was a cat who had learned to protect herself by shutting down. She had learned that it was safer to stay silent, to stay still, than to reach out for something that might hurt her. I understood it now. She had been through too much. She had learned to survive, but not to live. And I was asking her to do the impossible, to trust again one day. About a week into our new life together, I sat down on the couch, feeling the weight of the week's frustration settle into my shoulders. Daisy was sitting in her usual spot, across the room, watching me, but this time, there was something different in her eyes. She wasn't as tense. Her body wasn't as rigid. It was almost like she was considering something she hadn't allowed herself to consider before. I decided to take a chance. I slowly reached out my hand, palm up toward her. It felt like the longest moment of my life. She didn't move, she didn't flinch, but her eyes softened, just a little. And then, without warning, she stood up and walked over to me. She stopped just in front of me, her body still cautious, but no longer distant. My heart raced as I sat, perfectly still. I didn't want to scare her away. I didn't want to ruin this fragile moment. Slowly, I reached out again, my hand hovering just above her head. Daisy stood there, her fur bristling slightly, her eyes watching my every movement. I could feel the tension in her body, but there was something else too. It was like she was waiting for me to make the next move. I gently stroked her back, the first time I'd ever touched her like this. She tensed at first, but then something unexpected happened. She didn't pull away, she didn't run. She stayed there, letting me touch her, letting me in. And for the first time in over a week, she didn't feel like a stranger. She felt like a cat, my cat. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was progress. And that night, for the first time since I brought her home, I went to bed with a sense of hope. Maybe it wouldn't be easy. Maybe Daisy wouldn't suddenly become the affectionate cat I wanted her to be. But we were getting somewhere, and that was enough for now. As the days turned into weeks, something shifted between Daisy and me. The tension, once so thick that it felt suffocating, started to ease just a little bit at a time. It was as though we were both learning to coexist in the same space, each of us finding our rhythm in the silence we shared. Daisy was no longer hiding in corners, but instead, she moved cautiously around the house, exploring the rooms, peeking into the kitchen when I was making my morning coffee, and resting in spots where she could keep an eye on me without feeling trapped. I had learned that Daisy wasn't going to rush into affection. She wasn't the type to immediately bond or show signs of trust, but she was moving forward, and that was enough. I didn't need her to be the same cat I remembered reading about in books, curled up in laps and purring contentedly. I just needed her to feel safe. It was the small things that told me she was starting to feel at home. For the first time in weeks, I saw her on the couch one evening, sprawled out in a way that suggested she was starting to claim the space as her own. Her body was relaxed, no more stiff muscles, no more wary eyes darting around the room. She was simply lying there, gazing out the window, as if the world outside wasn't as threatening as it used to be. I sat down slowly next to her, careful not to startle her. She didn't flinch, she didn't pull away. I reached out my hand, almost hesitantly, unsure of what kind of response I would get. To my surprise, Daisy shifted just a little closer to me, and then, to my shock, she nuzzled her head against my arm. The warmth of her fur against my skin was more than I had hoped for. It wasn't much, no purring, no joyful leaps into my lap, but it was a sign. It was progress. The days after that moment felt like a slow march towards something better. Daisy began to trust me, in small but meaningful ways. I could see it in the way she looked at me, now no longer with that wary, distant gaze, but with a quiet recognition that I wasn't going anywhere. The first real breakthrough came when Daisy began following me around the house. It wasn't in the frantic, hyperactive way that some cats do. Instead, she would trail behind me, quietly, as though she was just trying to figure me out. If I went into the kitchen, she'd stand at the doorway and watch, her eyes always on me. If I walked into the bathroom, I'd hear the soft shuffle of paws behind me as she followed me inside. It wasn't a request for attention, not yet. It was more like she was letting me know that she was there, that she was willing to be near me. One evening, I decided to test something. I left the bedroom door open and sat on the bed with a book in hand, hoping Daisy would come in. I hadn't pushed her to get closer, hadn't tried to force her into a situation where she might feel uncomfortable. Instead, I just let the door be open, let her come to me if she wanted to. It took a while, but after about 30 minutes, I saw her small head peek around the corner, her eyes wide but filled with curiosity. I smiled to myself, but I didn't move. I didn't want to scare her away. Daisy took a few tentative steps into the room, then stopped. She stood there for a moment, observing me, her tail flicking ever so slightly. I didn't call her. I didn't even look up. I simply waited, and in the silence, I could feel the shift the moment when Daisy realized that she was safe. After what felt like an eternity, she walked over to the bed and jumped up next to me. It was the first time she had done so voluntarily, and it felt like a victory in itself. At first, she sat at the edge of the bed just looking at me, still unsure. But then, as I turned the pages of my book, I felt her curl up beside me. She didn't press against me. She didn't climb into my lap. But she was there, lying beside me, her body relaxed in a way I had never seen before. I let my hand rest lightly on her back, and for the first time, she didn't flinch. Instead, she shifted slightly, allowing me to touch her, and I could feel the faintest vibration against my hand. It wasn't a loud purr, like a soft hum, barely audible, but it was there. And in that moment, I felt like I was finally seeing the real Daisy, not the frightened silent cat that had been dropped off at the shelter, but a cat who was learning to trust again, one tiny step at a time. The weeks that followed were filled with small victories. Daisy started to sleep in the same room as me, not always on the bed, but always within sight. I could see her slowly starting to claim different areas of the house as she'd sit by the window, watching the birds outside, or curl up in the sunbeam that streamed through the living room window. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was exploring her new world. One afternoon, as I sat at the kitchen table, Daisy jumped up onto the counter, her paws making soft taps against the surface. I looked up in surprise. She had never done that before. I had always kept the counters clear, thinking she would be too scared to jump up. But there she was, confidently perched on the edge. She stared at me, and for a moment, I wasn't sure whether to scold her or encourage her. But then, I saw the spark of curiosity in her eyes, the same spark that had been missing all those weeks ago. I didn't scold her. Instead, I laughed, softly. "Well, I guess this is your new spot now, huh?" I said, my voice light and playful. Daisy blinked slowly, then settled down, her body relaxing as she curled into a small bowl. It was a small thing, just a cat on the counter, but it felt like another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Daisy was no longer afraid to explore. She was no longer afraid to make the house her own. One day, about a month after Daisy had first come home, I walked into the living room to find her curled up on the couch, her eyes half closed, a peaceful look on her face. The once wary cat who had flinched at every touch was now resting in a place she felt comfortable, in a space she had claimed as her own. I sat down next to her, my hand resting gently on her back. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let me stroke her fur, and this time, there was no hesitation. There was no fear. Just a quiet acceptance, the soft rumble of her purring filling the room. That day, I knew that we were getting there. Slowly, steadily, Daisy was finding her way back to herself, and I was right there with her. It wasn't a perfect journey, and it wasn't always easy. But every time Daisy showed me a new side of herself, whether it was a playful swat at a toy or a quiet nuzzle against my hand, I knew that we were on the right path. The trust was building, piece by piece, like the slow but steady work of mending a broken heart. By the time we reached the 2-month mark, Daisy wasn't the same cat who had entered my life in a shelter full of fear and silence. She was still cautious, still quiet, but she was no longer hiding. She had begun to trust, to feel safe, and in doing so, she had started to thrive. Her purring was louder now, her body more relaxed. She had become a part of my life in ways that words could barely capture, and, just like that, Daisy had found her place both in my home and in my heart. As the weeks passed, Daisy began to find her rhythm. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't always obvious, but every day there was a little more of her that started to emerge. Where once there had been silence and distance, now there were signs of a cat finding joy in small moments. I'd catch her staring out of the window at the birds, or chasing a stray beam of sunlight that danced across the floor. These small things, so easy to overlook, began to feel like victories. One afternoon, I left the front door ajar while I was doing the laundry. The weather was warm, and I thought Daisy might enjoy the fresh air. At first, she stood in the doorway, sniffing the breeze. She didn't step outside immediately. Her cautious nature kept her tethered to the house, but I didn't mind. I knew she needed time to explore on her terms. As I continued with my chores, I caught a glimpse of her. Daisy had slowly moved to the doorstep, standing there, still and calm, her eyes taking in the world outside. I smiled to myself, wondering what she was thinking, what she was feeling. And then, to my surprise, she took a tentative step forward, followed by another. She moved slowly, almost as if the world outside were a completely foreign place to her. But that was okay. She wasn't rushing. She was taking it all in. Daisy stopped just a few feet away from the door, and I stood quietly, not wanting to interrupt her. I watched her as she sat down, her tail flicking slowly as she observed the world. It was a small moment, but it meant more to me than any other milestone we had passed together. She wasn't just stepping outside. She was stepping into a new world, one that she had every right to explore but had been too afraid to do until now. The next few days, Daisy began to spend more time outside. At first it was only for a few minutes at a time, but gradually she became more comfortable. She would sit in the yard, her eyes scanning the area, her body still alert, but no longer trembling with fear. I would watch her from the window as she wandered around, sniffing at the flowers or stretching out in the sun. The house was no longer just a place of confinement. It was part of a larger world, one that Daisy was starting to claim for herself. One morning, I decided to take her on a walk. It had been a long time since I had even considered the idea of leash training her, but the thought came to me, and I decided to try. I retrieved the harness and gently placed it around her small frame. Daisy stiffened at first, her muscles tightening in response to the unfamiliar feeling. But she didn't run away. She didn't hide. She just stood there, her eyes focused on the harness, then on me. I spoke softly, telling her it was okay, that we were going to be okay. With the leash attached, I opened the door and stepped outside, waiting for Daisy to follow. She hesitated for a moment, then took a cautious step forward, her paws feeling the grass beneath her for the first time. I walked slowly, giving her the space she needed. For the first time since I had brought her home, Daisy was out of the confines of the house, walking with me side by side. At first, Daisy moved in small, uncertain steps. She would stop every few feet to sniff the air or stare at an unfamiliar sound, but each time, I could see her confidence growing. I spoke to her in soft, calming tones, letting her know she was safe, and little by little, she began to relax. The walk wasn't about getting anywhere. It was about letting Daisy experience the world at her own pace. In her own way, by the end of the walk, Daisy was walking with a bit more ease. She wasn't darting around like some cats do, running to and fro. Instead, she walked with purpose, exploring, taking in the sights, and testing the boundaries of her new world. As we returned to the house, I noticed her eyes had softened. They weren't filled with fear anymore, but with curiosity and wonder. It was a sign that she was starting to trust, starting to feel at home. Over the next few weeks, Daisy began to show more of her personality. The cautious cat who had once hidden away was now the one who would sit by the window and watch the birds. She would explore the backyard, weaving through the plants and bushes, her tail flicking back and forth. With each discovery, she was no longer a cat merely surviving. She was living, breathing, and experiencing life. But there were still moments when the past would catch up with her. I'd hear her growl softly at a sudden noise, or see her jump when something unexpected happened. These were reminders that Daisy's journey wasn't over. The trauma she had experienced was still with her, in some ways, lingering just beneath the surface. But each time, she recovered. Each time, she grew stronger. One day, after we had returned from another walk, I sat down on the couch, and Daisy climbed up beside me. She didn't hesitate. She simply curled up next to me, resting her head on my leg. I gently stroked her fur, marveling at how far she had come. The cat who had once been too scared to even look at me was now lying beside me, trusting me with her space, her time, her heart. It wasn't long before Daisy began seeking out affection on her own terms. She would nudge my hand with her nose when she wanted attention, her eyes soft and trusting. She would purr when I scratched behind her ears, her purrs becoming louder, more confident. She was learning that affection didn't have to be a painful thing, that love wasn't something to be feared. I could see the change in her, not just in the way she moved, but in the way she looked at me. Her eyes no longer held the deep sadness and wariness they once had. They were bright with curiosity, filled with a soft trust. And every time I saw that, I couldn't help but feel like we were both healing. We were both finding our way together, learning to love and trust again. One afternoon, as I sat in the living room, Daisy jumped up onto the windowsill and looked outside, her eyes locked on the birds in the yard. For a moment she sat there, completely still, watching them flit from branch to branch. And then, to my surprise, she leaped off the sill and padded over to the door. She sat there, waiting. I opened the door, and Daisy stepped outside. It wasn't a tentative step this time. She was confident, sure of herself. She walked into the yard, her body relaxed, her tail held high. I stood by the door, watching her explore with a sense of pride. She was no longer the scared cat I had found in the shelter. She was a cat who had learned to trust, to explore, to love. Daisy had come so far, and so had I. We had both found something we hadn't even known we were looking for. In each other, we had found healing, understanding, and love. And as I watched her wander around the yard, I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for both of us. The pet I had rescued was no longer a scared, broken soul. Daisy was becoming the cat she was always meant to be, and I couldn't wait to see where this journey would take us next. It had been weeks since Daisy had shown any real signs of fear. Sure, there were still occasional moments when she'd jump at sudden movements or the sound of a door slamming, but for the most part she had adjusted. I had started to think that perhaps she had finally left her past behind. Maybe she was truly ready to move forward, to live a life free of the shadows that had haunted her for so long. But life has a way of reminding you that healing isn't linear, and it can often feel like 2 steps forward and 1 step back. That afternoon, I learned just how fragile that progress could be. It was a typical Tuesday, sunny with a light breeze, nothing unusual. I had left the front door open, hoping Daisy might take the opportunity to enjoy the cool air. I was in the kitchen, making lunch, when I heard it, the distinct sound of Daisy's low guttural growl. I froze. This wasn't the sound she made when she was curious or when she was playing. This was different. This was the sound of fear. I rushed to the front door, and there she was standing at the threshold, her body tense and low to the ground, her fur bristling. Her eyes were wide with fear, and for the first time in weeks, she wasn't the calm, collected cat I had come to know. She was a scared animal, caught between a world of safety and the haunting memories of her past. At the end of the driveway, a delivery truck was parked, its engine humming softly. The sound of the truck's engine, the clanking of boxers being moved, everything seemed to trigger something deep inside Daisy. She bolted into the yard, her eyes focused on the truck, her body trembling as if she were preparing for a fight. I quickly ran after her, calling her name in a calm voice, trying to bring her back, but she didn't listen. Daisy's eyes were locked on the truck, and all I could see was the terror in them. She moved like lightning, her body tense, her movements erratic as she darted toward the truck. I reached out, grabbing for her, but she slipped out of my grasp. Her body too quick and too panicked. She ran straight into the street, and I screamed. In horror, my heart pounding as I realized what was happening. Daisy was in full flight mode, completely consumed by whatever trauma had been triggered in that moment. She wasn't thinking, she was reacting, like an animal caught in survival mode. I ran faster, my voice a mix of panic and desperation. Daisy stopped, but it was too late. In the distance, I could see a car speeding down the road, the driver oblivious to the cat. In front of them, the fear coursing through me was suffocating. I pushed myself harder, adrenaline rushing through my veins. And in one final effort, I lunged forward, grabbing Daisy by the scruff of her neck and pulling her back just as the car passed by. My heart raced as I held her close, my breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. Daisy was trembling uncontrollably in my arms, her body stiff with fear. For a few seconds, we just stood there in the middle of the yard, both of us trying to catch our breath. Both of us still in shock from what had just happened. I slowly lowered her to the ground, still shaking, my hands trembling as I stroked her fur. She was silent, her body still rigid, her eyes wide and unblinking. I had never seen Daisy like this before. I had never seen her so completely consumed by her fear. It was like everything we had built over the past few weeks. The trust, the bond had been shattered in an instant. I didn't know what to do. I had been so sure that she was past this, that we were beyond the moments of terror and hesitation. But in that instant, I realized that Daisy wasn't just recovering from a traumatic past. She was still living it. The past wasn't gone, it was still with her, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for something, anything, to trigger it. I sat down on the ground, pulling Daisy into my lap, and I just held her there, speaking softly. To her, I didn't know what to say, but I knew that she needed comfort, and I wasn't going to let her go through this alone. You're safe now, I whispered, stroking her back. You're safe, Daisy. I've got you. It felt like hours before her body began to relax, the trembling subsiding just a little. Her breathing steadied, though her eyes remained wide, as though she were still processing what had just happened. Slowly her muscles loosened, and she curled up against me, her body trembling only slightly now. It wasn't over, I knew that. This moment, this crisis had cracked open something inside her that wasn't easily fixed. The fear wasn't just something she could shake off. It was a part of her, a shadow that followed her every move. And no matter how much progress we had made, it was still there, lurking, waiting for the right trigger to bring it all rushing back. I sat with Daisy for a long time that day, just holding her, just being there. I didn't try to fix her. I didn't try to push her to move on from what had happened. I just let her be. Over the next few days, Daisy withdrew a little. She spent more time in her safe spots, only coming out when she felt like it was safe. But as the days went by, I saw something else in her, something that I hadn't seen before. She was still afraid, still haunted by her past. But there was a flicker of something else too. She was learning to trust again. She was learning that it was okay to feel fear, but that fear didn't have to control her. She had learned how to heal before, and she would learn again. But this time, I would be there with her every step of the way. It was the hardest thing I had ever experienced with her, to see her so broken, so afraid. But it was also a turning point. I realized that healing wasn't a straight path, that the journey would have its setbacks. And in that moment, I knew that Daisy was more than just a rescue cat. She was a survivor. And together, we would keep fighting for her peace, no matter how many times the past tried to resurface. The days following Daisy's sudden outburst were a whirlwind of emotions. It felt like we were back at square one, like all the progress we had made, all the healing we had done, had been undone in an instant. The fear that had once seemed so distant was suddenly back, and it was clear that Daisy's recovery wasn't going to be as straightforward as I had hoped. But as the days went by, something changed. Daisy didn't shut down the way I expected her to. She didn't hide away in the corners of the house, retreating from the world. Instead, she remained close to me, still cautious, but more engaged than I had seen her in the days before. It was like she had a moment of clarity, a realization that the world wasn't going to hurt her, again that she was safe. I spent a lot of time just being there with her, letting her set the pace. I didn't push her to go outside, didn't try to rush her back to the progress we had made before. Instead, I sat with her on the couch, holding her gently, speaking softly, reminding her over and over again that she was loved, that she was safe. Daisy started to respond, slowly but surely. At first it was just little things. She would follow me around the house again, her steps hesitant, but there was no panic in her movements. She wasn't running from the door anymore. She was walking toward it cautiously, but with a quiet curiosity. I could see that her trust was beginning to rebuild, piece by piece. One morning, a week after the scare with the delivery truck, I woke up to find Daisy curled up at the foot of my bed, something she hadn't done in a long time. I reached down to stroke her back, and for the first time since the incident, she didn't flinch. She leaned into my hand, letting me pet her without hesitation. Her purring, which had been quiet and intermittent, grew louder, more confident. I didn't push her. I didn't expect her to suddenly be the playful, affectionate cat I had always imagined. But in that moment, I felt something that I hadn't felt in days. Hope. Daisy was still here, still with me, and we were still healing together. Over the next few days, Daisy's behavior continued to improve. She started to spend more time outside again, this time with less fear. She would sit in the yard, watching the birds or lying in the grass, her body relaxed, her tail swishing slowly behind her. She wasn't afraid of the world anymore. The outside world, which had once felt like an overwhelming and dangerous place, was now just a part of her routine. She was learning how to enjoy it again, to take it in without the constant fear that once controlled her every move. One afternoon, while I was working at my desk, I heard a soft scratching at the door. I turned around to see Daisy standing in the doorway, her eyes wide and curious. I smiled and opened the door, letting her in. As she stepped inside, she looked up at me, then walked over to her favorite spot by the window and jumped up to the sill. She sat there for a few minutes, her eyes scanning the world outside, before turning back to me. It was a small moment, but it meant the world to me. Daisy wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and she was finding her way back to herself. I walked over and sat next to her, letting her rest her head on my lap. Her purring was steady and full of contentment, and I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of peace as the days turned into weeks. Daisy continued to show me signs of her recovery. She played with her toys again, batting them around with more energy than I had ever seen before. She followed me around the house, rubbing against my legs, seeking out attention without hesitation. The bond between us deepened, and I could see it in the way she looked at me. There was no longer the distance, the uncertainty. There was trust, there was love. But even as she grew stronger, I knew that Daisy's journey wasn't finished. She still had moments of fear, moments when the past would creep back into her mind, and she would flinch at a sudden sound, or freeze at a strange movement. But those moments became fewer and farther between. She was learning to trust the world, again, and with each passing day, that trust grew stronger. One evening, I was sitting on the porch with Daisy by my side, the sun setting in the distance. It had been a long day, but it felt like one of those rare moments when everything was just right. Daisy stretched out beside me, her eyes half closed as she basked in the last rays of sunlight. I reached down to stroke her fur, and she looked up at me, her eyes soft and content. For a moment, there was nothing else, just the two of us. Together in the quiet of the evening, I knew that there would be more challenges ahead. Daisy's past would always be a part of her, and there would be times when the fear would return. But I also knew that we had come a long way. Daisy had survived. She had learned to trust again, and I had learned how to be patient, how to let her heal at her own pace, how to love her through the setbacks and the breakthroughs. The next morning, Daisy greeted me at the door, her tail held high, her eyes bright. She wasn't the same cat who had walked into my life months ago, silent and broken. She was a cat who had found her voice, her confidence, and her place in the world. She was home. As I watched her walk through the door, I realized something important. Daisy wasn't just my pet. She was a part of me, a part of my journey. And together, we had found something more than just healing. We had found love, and that love was enough to carry us through anything that came next. It had been several months since that chaotic afternoon when Daisy ran into the street, consumed by fear, and I had to pull her back from the edge. That moment, scary, overwhelming, and heartbreaking, had become a turning point in our journey together. It was the moment I realized that healing wasn't just about physical wounds. It was about learning to trust again, to reclaim pieces of yourself that you thought were lost forever. And Daisy had taught me more about patience, trust, and resilience than I could have ever expected. As I sit here now, watching her bask in the warmth of the sun streaming through the window, I'm filled with a sense of peace. She's no longer the fearful, silent cat who arrived at my doorstep. She's transformed, her body more relaxed, her eyes brighter, and her purring now a constant, soothing sound that fills the room. Daisy has become a part of me, not just in the way a pet is, a part of their owner's life, but in a deeper, more profound way. There are still moments when the past rears its head. Sometimes, Daisy will flinch at a sudden noise or hesitate when something unfamiliar comes too close. But these moments are fewer, and I have learned not to rush them. I've come to understand that healing takes time, sometimes years, sometimes a lifetime, and that's okay. What matters is that we keep moving forward, one small step at a time. We've built a life together now, one that's filled with quiet moments of companionship. Daisy follows me from room to room, sits with me during meals, and curls up beside me at night. There's an ease between us now, a comfortable silence that speaks volumes. When she looks at me with those bright eyes, I no longer see the fear that once clouded them. I see trust. I see love. But Daisy has also given me something I never expected, a new perspective on life. Her resilience, her ability to survive and rebuild, has shown me the importance of patience not just with her, but with myself, with others, and with life in general. It's easy to rush through life, to want things to happen quickly, to demand that everything fall into place right away. But Daisy has taught me that the most beautiful things take time. Healing takes time, trust takes time, and love takes time to build, brick by brick, moment by moment. As we continue this journey together, I know there will still be challenges ahead. Life doesn't offer easy answers, and there will be times when we face setbacks. But I also know that Daisy and I are stronger than we were before. We've already survived the hard part, the hardest part, and now we're building something that will last. I can't predict what the future holds, but what I do know is that Daisy is home. She's found a place where she can heal, where she can be herself, and where she will always be loved. And I too have found my place in her world. As I watch her sleeping peacefully on the couch, I feel a deep sense of gratitude. Daisy has taught me so much about resilience, about love, and about never giving up, no matter how broken or lost you feel. She may have come into my life as a scared, silent cat, but she has become a symbol of hope, of healing, and of the incredible power of love. And as she stirs in her sleep, curling up tighter in the warmth of the sun, I realize that maybe we all have a little bit of Daisy in us, parts of ourselves that need time to heal, parts of ourselves that need patience and understanding to come to life. But with love, trust, and the right person by your side, even the deepest wounds can heal.